Together, they had felt the awkwardness, so there was no need to act it. It came from within. 4 years later, Hitchcock made Rebecca with Joan Fontaine and Laurence Olivier. Fontaine, at 21, was taking her first leading role and was horribly nervous about playing opposite Olivier, who was widely recognized as an actor of genius. Another director might have eased her insecurities, but Hitchcock was seemingly doing the opposite. He chose to pass along gossip from the rest of the cast and crew. No one thought she was up to the job, he told her, and Olivier had really wanted his wife Vivien Leigh to get the part. Fontaine felt terrified, isolated, unsure. Exactly the qualities of her character in the film. She hardly needed to act. And her memorable performance in Rebecca was the start of a glorious career. When Hitchcock made The Paradigm Case in 1947, his leading lady, Anne Todd, was appearing in her first Hollywood movie and found it hard to relax. So in the silence on set before the director called action, Hitchcock would tell her a particularly salacious story that would make her laugh or gasp in shock. Before one scene in which she had to lie on a bed in an elegant nightgown, Hitchcock suddenly jumped on her, yelling, "Relax!" Antics like this made it easy for her to let go of her inhibitions and be more natural. When cast and crew were tired on set, or when they'd gotten too casual and were chatting rather than concentrating on their work, Hitchcock would never yell or complain. Instead, he might smash a light bulb with his fist or throw his teacup against a wall. Everyone would quickly sober up and recover his or her focus. Clearly, Hitchcock mistrusted language and explanation, preferring action to words as a way of communicating, and this preference extended to the form and content of his films. That gave his screenwriters a particularly hard time. After all, putting the film into words was their job. In story meetings, Hitchcock would discuss the ideas he was interested in, themes like people's doubleness, their capacity for both good and evil, the fact that no one in this world is truly innocent. The writers would produce pages of dialogue expressing these ideas elegantly and subtly, only to find them edited out in favor of actions and images. In Vertigo, 1958, and Psycho, 1960, for example, Hitchcock inserted mirrors in many scenes. In Spellbound, 1945, it was shots of ski tracks and other kinds of parallel lines. The murder in Strangers on a Train, 1951, was revealed through its reflection in a pair of glasses. For Hitchcock, evidently, images like these revealed his ideas of the doubleness in the human soul better than words did, but on paper, this seemed somewhat contrived. On set, the producers of Hitchcock's films often watched in bewilderment as the director moved the camera, not the actors, to stage his scenes. It seemed to make no sense, as if he loved the technical side of filmmaking more than dialogue and the human presence. Nor could editors fathom his obsession with sounds, colors, the size of the actors' heads within the frame, the speed with which people moved. He seemed to favor these endless visual details over the story itself. And then the film would be a finished product, and suddenly everything that had seemed peculiar about his method made perfect sense. Audiences often responded to Hitchcock's films more deeply than they did to the work of any other director. The images, the pacing, the camera movements swept them along and got under their skin. A Hitchcock film was not just seen, it was experienced, and it stayed in the mind long after the viewing. Interpretation. In interviews, Hitchcock often told a story about his childhood. When he was around 6, his father, upset at something he had done, sent him to the local police station with a note. The officer on duty read the note and locked little Alfred in a cell, telling him, "This is what we do to naughty boys." He was released after just a few minutes, but the experience marked him indelibly. Had his father yelled at him, as most boys' fathers did, he would have become defensive and rebellious. But leaving him alone, surrounded by frightening authority figures in a dark cell with its unfamiliar smells, that was a much more powerful way to communicate. As Hitchcock discovered, to teach people a lesson, to really alter their behavior, you must alter their experience. Aim at their emotions. Inject unforgettable images into their minds. Shake them up. Unless you are supremely eloquent, it is hard to accomplish this through words and direct expression. There are simply too many people talking at us, trying to persuade us of this or that. Words become part of this noise, and we either tune them out or become even more resistant. To communicate in a deep and real way, you must bring people back to their childhood, when they were less defensive and more impressed by sounds, images, actions, a world of pre-verbal communication. It requires speaking a kind of language composed of actions, all strategically designed to affect people's moods and emotions, what they can least control. That is precisely the language Hitchcock developed and perfected over the years. With actors, he wanted to get the most natural performance out of them, in essence, to get them not to act. To tell them to relax or be natural would have been absurd. It would only have made them more awkward and defensive than they already were. Instead, just as his father had gotten him to feel terror in a London police station, he got them to feel the emotions of the movie. Frustration, isolation, loss of inhibition. Of course, he hadn't mislaid the handcuffs key somewhere on the set of the 39 Steps, as Donat later found out. The supposed loss was a strategy. Instead of prodding actors with irritating words, which come from the outside and are pushed away, Hitchcock made these feelings part of their inner experience. And this communicated immediately on screen. With audiences, too, Hitchcock never preached a message. Instead, he used the visual power of film to return them to that childlike state when images and compelling symbols had such a visceral effect. It is imperative in life's battles to be able to communicate your ideas to people, to be able to alter their behavior. Communication is a form of warfare. Your enemies here are defensive. They want to be left alone with their pre-existing prejudices and beliefs. The more deeply you penetrate their defenses, the more you occupy their mental space, the more effectively you are communicating. In verbal terms, most people wage a kind of medieval warfare, using words, pleas, and calls for attention like battle axes and clubs to hit people over the head. But in being so direct, they only make their targets more resistant. Instead, you must learn to fight indirectly and unconventionally, tricking people into lowering their defenses, hitting their emotions, altering their experience, dazzling them with images, powerful symbols, and visceral sensory cues. Bringing them back to that childlike state when they were more vulnerable and fluid, the communicated idea penetrates deep behind their defenses. Because you are not fighting the usual way, you will have an unusual power. From Samurai Zen, The Warrior Koans, by Trevor Leggett. The priest Ryokan asked Zen master Bukan for an explanation of the 4 Dharma worlds. Bukan said, to explain the 4 Dharma worlds should not need a lot of chatter. He filled a white teacup with tea, drank it up, and smashed the cup to pieces right in front of the priest, saying, "Have you got it?" The priest said, "Thanks to your here and now teaching, I have penetrated right into the realm of principle and event." The Mastermind. In 1498, the 29-year-old Niccolò Machiavelli was appointed secretary of Florence's Second Chancery, which managed the city's foreign affairs. The choice was unusual. Machiavelli was a relatively low